be able to come online. Well, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I lead our California Natural Resources Agency, and really excited to be helping to lead our celebration of Pride Month in the month of June. It's been a busy month. We kicked off the month in conversation with our sister agency, Cal EPA, in discussion with transgender leaders across the environmental movement. Shortly thereafter, our two agencies did what we hope to be our first annual participation in Sacramento Pride March, which we had about 150 of us and our friends and families celebrating Pride in Sacramento. And then, of course, we're holding this conversation today with LGBTQ2s leaders across our agency, but also across our state. So we are really, really excited across the administration, working for Governor Newsom and at our agency. We are celebrating our tremendous diversity throughout the year. This year, as we teamed up with Cal EPA, our motto for Pride Month is be yourself and change the world. And so today we're talking about the importance of community and what it means to be an open and affirming community, supporting each other to bring our authentic selves to the work that we do. This is part of our Secretary Speaker Series, where we bring together leaders, big thinkers from inside of state government and outside of state government to talk about priorities and the issues that matter to all of us. This discussion here today will be recorded. So in just a couple of days, you can go onto our Natural Resources website and you can check out the recording or share it with others. We also have some ways to make this at least as interactive a discussion as we can with a large group. My colleague Geeta will be providing in the chat function of the Zoom links that tell you a little bit more about our panelists today and also about the topics and the priorities that we raise. You'll also have an opportunity to ask us questions or provide observations or comments through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that at any time and type in a question, and it'll come to those of us who are part of this panel. And we'll hopefully work in your question into the conversation. Today, we are joined by 7 tremendous leaders, again, both within our agency and outside of our agency. I'll just list them briefly and then have a chance to introduce each individually. I am pleased to have part of this conversation my colleague here at the Natural Resources Agency on our executive team. That is our first ever Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs, Geneva E.B. Thompson. Another colleague I'm proud to work with is Clessie Bennett, who is an environmental scientist working on our climate team at agency. We have Amy Kuo, who works as a legislative analyst at our California Conservation Corps. We have Maya Poston, who works for our California State Parks Department. We have our colleague, more broadly, Sarah Griffin, who helps to lead the Surfrider Foundation Northern California branch. We have Agnes Vianson, who founded and leads the Eastern Sierra Conservation Corps, doing amazingly exciting things. And we're really pleased to have with us Stephanie Haskins, who has done a lot in her career throughout state government and now leads the Reporters, Inc. So let me again welcome everybody and first introduce Geneva. And Geneva, first of all, thank you for all of the work that you do institutionalizing tribal partnerships across our state government. Thanks to your leadership, we're doing so much on that front. But today I want to ask you about your views, your perspective on the importance of community in workplace, particularly building an open and affirming workplace for all of us, regardless of our gender identity or sexual orientation or sexuality. So glad to kick off the conversation with you.
Well, Wado, and thank you so much, Wade, for having me join this panel and the opportunity to share some thoughts with fellow panelists here today. It's a true honor to be here, and I really appreciate everyone who's logged in to also join in the conversation. As Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, my name is Geneva E.B. Thompson. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and she, her pronouns. And I also serve as the Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs here at the California Natural Resources Agency. And a huge part of my role is to work with and collaboratively work with tribes in our environmental and natural resources policies and programs, and work closely with the departments underneath the agency umbrella and their tribal affairs teams to ensure that we are implementing early, often, and meaningful tribal consultations, identifying opportunities for increased tribal access and co-management of our public lands, as well as identifying opportunities for ancestral land return. And so it's such a huge honor to serve in this role and to be here with my colleagues in this important work. And I really appreciate the question about community and what does community mean in the workplace, and how building a safe and comfortable work environment improves not only the health and well-being of LGBTQ2+ individuals, but everyone in the office. And so I really appreciate the question. And I think, to summarize my thoughts on it is a community in the workplace means the space to be your true, authentic self. And also creating a space for your colleagues to feel comfortable in being their true, authentic selves as well. And so, every person, no matter who they are, brings all of their identities and experiences with them in the workplace. And safe, welcoming workplaces encourage creativity and diversity and creative problem solving and thinking, whereas toxic and harmful workplaces can lead to people hiding their true selves, staying in the closet, not expressing their identities, therefore not bringing their experiences to the table. This can also lead to isolation, depression, and mental health issues if folks don't feel comfortable being their true, authentic selves. Also, a harmful or toxic workplace can lead to creating a space where bullies feel comfortable harassing people based on their identities. And so as we think about building inclusive workplaces, we're making sure that we're having a space where everyone can feel comfortable in their true, authentic selves. And I think a very important component to that is also ensuring that workplaces welcome and celebrate everyone's differences. And there needs to be a strong understanding of how intersectionality of identities play a role in how a person relates with the world and how the world relates to that individual. And so this term intersectionality was coined by Professor Crenshaw in 1989. It really just describes how race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ableism, and other individual characteristics intersect with one another and overlap. And so we all carry multiple and intersecting identities, but society treats those different identities differently. And so, for example, transphobia, anti-Blackness, and anti-women sentiments lead to hate crimes and violence towards Black trans women at disproportionate rates. And so it's important when we're thinking about building a safe and inclusive workplace to know that intersecting identities play out in different ways and in different situations, and to be very aware of that. Another key component to thinking about inclusive spaces for all identities and all people is to be aware of not erasing people's existence and identities. And this is a very common problem that we see with working with and inviting and including Native Americans into the workplace and having Native folks employed in the workplace. For We see a lot of reporting and statistics consistently excluding Native people and their identities and expressions, and putting them in the other category and not fully understanding what the unique experiences Native people are having in the workplace. And this goes back to the history and the establishment of this country, right? And so tribes are sovereign nations that have stewarded the lands since time immemorial, and through historical wrongs and acts of genocide have led to tribal members being enslaved and killed, and tribes being forcibly removed from their lands and natural resources. And it's part of that action that has led to the erasure of a lot of Native folks today. So with one, it's key just to remember that tribes and Native Americans are still alive today and are still navigating those harms that's associated with those historical wrongs. And it's also really important to have a finer lens and look at it as it relates to the LGBTQ2+ community, where Two-Spirit people are often erased and excluded from the community, which leads to their identities not being celebrated and honored and respected. And so the term Two-Spirit is an umbrella term across American Indian and First Nations cultures to describe someone whose gender that exists outside of colonial logic. This term kind of originated in the 1990 Conference for Gay and Lesbian Native People to replace the harmful, derogatory, and colonial terms used for gender non-conforming Native individuals. And so this umbrella term isn't intended to replace tribes' own terms for Two-Spirit individuals, isn't intended to replace what it means to be a Two-Spirit person in relation to your Native community, but it is to have some context and language to push back against this erasure that folks are facing. You'll see that many Two-Spirit people prefer to use their own Indigenous languages to express their identity instead of that Two-Spirit term. But again, it's a tool just to push back against this erasure. For many tribes, Two-Spirit people hold significant roles in their communities, ceremonies, and in leadership. And again, through that act of colonization, Two-Spirit people and identities were outlawed and actions were taken to erase those identities. It's also really important to note that the Two-Spirit term is reserved only for Indigenous people, and non-Indigenous people using the term inappropriately can be deemed a cultural appropriation or at times the continuation of that colonization. So I just wanted to share some of those thoughts for the opening of the panel. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and really looking forward to continuing the conversation with my fellow panelists. Wado, and thank you.
Geneva, huge thanks to you for sharing all of that, because it's so helpful to improve our understanding, our sophistication in terms of building a safe and comfortable workplace, understanding that, you know, each of us brings multiple identities into the workplace. And historically, that has meant that many people have not felt comfortable or safe in the workplace. It's all about really trying to build that workplace where everyone can bring their set of identities to the work. And you, as a leader on our team, we've had so many conversations where I've learned so much, and you've created, you know, an open space for listening and learning. So huge thanks to you. We're going to bring you back into the group conversation, but I want to switch to my colleague, Plessy. Plessy Bennett leads a lot of our climate work here at the agency as an environmental scientist. And Plessy, we've talked a lot about some really wonky things, including carbon registries and natural working lands, but we haven't talked too much about your perspective on community and how you build, you know, support in a diverse workplace that honors, you know, everyone's identities. So interested to hear a little bit more about, you know, your journey and then how you think about this topic.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me on this panel today. It really is a great honor. And I just want to say it was so exciting to see the CNRA and Cali PA contingent and the Sacramento Pride March, and then having a booth at the event. It was really an exciting and prideful moment to see my employer standing there and really supportive of my identity and my colleagues as well. As Secretary Crowfoot said, my name is Clessie Bennett. I am a senior environmental scientist on the CNRA climate team. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. And our team really works to increase the scale and the pace of nature-based climate solutions and build climate resilience across the state through statewide policies and plans and strategies, as well as some other cool projects. But I'll really turn to the question at hand here about building community and safe spaces in the workplace, and why I think it's important. To me, I believe that building this community really boils down to support and empathy, building a community and an environment with your coworkers across all levels of seniority, across all different teams, that is supportive, where you've got shared sense of purpose. There is intentionally cultivating connections and trust and building that empathy. It's not something that just comes overnight. There are things that we've got to work towards and make mistakes along the way. And I think doing this really leads to everyone feeling valued, and the importance of having everyone's perspectives feeling valued and appreciated. And to me, this can really allow for a safe and respectful workplace. And as Geneva mentioned, not doing this can lead to really toxic workplaces where bullying can thrive, which is, you will lose good team members and good talent and really do harm, which is obviously not our goal. And so I think why it's important, as you all have mentioned, it really allows for an atmosphere of authenticity, where you can build meaningful relationships with your coworkers, allowing for better collaboration and better respect among various colleagues and collaborators. As Geneva said, having this community allows for the intersection of interrelated issues, drawing from a diversity and backgrounds of experiences and identities that are being brought by your various team members, and the importance of that. And to me, it's, I think it allows us to do our job better and to really serve the people of the state better, to problem solve more effectively, and to just have a more effective outcome of our work. And I think once you create a space like this, there's room for growth, there's room for relationship building and general just happiness and jobs. Not saying that all happiness comes from jobs, but I think that there is room when an intentional and safe community is created for workers to derive some kind of happiness from those relationships and from the empathy shared. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, so well articulated. And, something I've learned over the years is it's really important for leaders in the workplace to be proactive about building that space. And I'm so grateful that, you felt proud of the agency stepping up and marching in the parade and being at the resource booth. Yeah, I think, we have to remind everybody, whether you're, an organizational leader outside of work or at work, it's up to all of us to actually proactively build that environment. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. I want to next introduce Amy Kuo. And Amy, as I mentioned, works at our California Conservation Corps, which is an incredible department that brings several thousand young Californians into environmental conservation work each year and sets them up, if they want, for careers in conservation. So, Amy, super excited to have you on as part of the conversation. Interested in your perspective coming from the Conservation Corps and your own experience about what a healthy, supportive workplace can look like, and what observations you have given your work at the Conservation Corps.
Thanks, Dr. Krovat. I want to also extend my gratitude for being in this space today. I think I'm picking up on some of the words that we've shared so far with authenticity, intention, and being proactive. And I think this space has certainly been curated with that kind of care and intention. And speaking from what I do as a legislative analyst, I'm thinking about how we coordinate with a lot of our leadership in the state on making a more inclusive workplace. I think about how in recent years, the California Conservation Corps, we worked with the legislature to really examine our statutes to make them more inclusive and kind of move forward from binary language. Earlier, we had things saying like young women and men of the Conservation Corps, and now we say young adults. And even though one might think that, you know, that's just in the statute, it's written, is this performative? But really thinking about if statute is our guiding principle and our kind of North Star for how we operate as a state entity, that's really not just changing our materials, but really the foundation, making it more inclusive. And I think also in terms of presentation for work, I think, Klessie, you mentioned that, you know, work shouldn't be all your life, but it is certainly a big part of our lives for many of us. And I think that when you show up to this space that you inhabit 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe 5 days a week, that you shouldn't have to feel that you have to hide a part of yourself, and that it's not that you should be obligated to express all aspects of yourself all the time, but it should be an option. And I think about how we want to make authenticity more accessible in that sense. I'm curious what everyone else thinks of when you think about authenticity. I think about it as what is the fullest expression of yourself, and how do you feel most comfortable in your own skin? Because there's a lot of ways we can look at authenticity. I think it can be a loaded word as well when we talk about various aspects of identity. Do we feel valid in these spaces? Am I enough of XYZ to be qualified as this entity? But at work, you know, we do a lot of code switching. You probably talk differently with your friends than you do with your boss. And it's kind of that idea that you want to have the option to be able to show up as your full self, that you shouldn't have to work certainly is work, but you shouldn't feel unsafe. And I think that's a priority in being able to show up authentically as yourself. And I'm really excited to talk more about community in the workplace as well. I think I'm certainly grateful that in my experience so far, I have been able to show up as my full self at work and feel supported in the workplace. And I will end it there to pass on to my colleagues.
And Amy, I'm interested, you know, given the Conservation Corps is bringing in thousands of young people each year, and each of these young people come from different backgrounds, different environments. They obviously bring their own multiple identities. What's your sense of how the Conservation Corps tries to ensure a comfortable, safe place for its young people, regardless of gender identity or sexuality, sexual orientation?
Yeah, thanks for that question. At the CCC, you know, we are the California Conservation Corps, but I've also heard change, and cool, calm, and collected. So take your pick. But I think we embody all those different kinds of Cs. And part of what we do is, you know, recently, at least in speaking specifically first to the gender-affirming care and that space, all Corps members have access to healthcare, which also provides them opportunities to explore options for either if they choose to transition medically, or also have access to counseling if they want to explore that in a kind of talk-based therapy space. I think the various communities at centers, while they vary, as an organization, I know a lot of our centers have supported the queer community by volunteering for Pride events or tabling and visiting museums and learning more about history. And so I think education is certainly a big part. And as a workforce development entity, we pride ourselves in not only that professional and training aspect, but personal development as well, because as you know, you can work out and be doing fuel reduction all day, but you will ultimately still have to interact with people, even if you go out way out in the woods. And so in fostering that environment, we really prioritize and are interested in creating a workforce that is reflective of California, and that includes folks of all identities, and making sure that we address the intersectional areas, as Geneva highlighted, different cultures, how do we all interact with each other? And I can keep going on about the CCC, but I don't want to take away time.
You know, Amy, one of the high points of my job is getting out in the field with the Conservation Corps members, because it is amazing just the diversity of California they represent, talented young people from every part of California, every background. And it's great to know that you all are so proactive, helping people be their authentic selves and come and get the support that they need, regardless of their identities. So thanks for all that you and your colleagues do. I next want to introduce Maya Poston. And Maya, as I mentioned, works at our Department of Recreation and Parks, or what we know as state parks. And Maya has a really interesting job ensuring the respectful repatriation of remains of our original inhabitants in California. So welcome, Maya, and maybe just talk a little bit about your job, and then also your perspective on this question around community, workplace, given where you work at state parks.
Yeah, I'll tell you, good afternoon. My name is Maya Poston. My pronouns are they, them. And as Secretary Crowfoot said, I work in tribal affairs at parks, at its simplest form, ensuring Parks's legal compliance with state and federal law pertaining to Indigenous repatriation. I work with tribes across not just California, but the nation, and sometimes internationally, to return ancestors and belongings that were stolen and eventually came to be under the legal obligation of state parks. And that is, it's a really heavy job, I'm not gonna lie, but it is very, very rewarding, because I get to work with so many different communities, and I really get to have the privilege, frankly, to work with so many different Native communities and to have those perspectives, and to be able to help heal, or to help as much as I can in healing from generational trauma and the historic and current attempts at genocide against Native communities. And so for me, community is integral to my job. I cannot do my job without having a sense of community between me and my colleagues, and also respecting the communities that I present myself to with tribes. I will say I've been out to varying degrees since I was 8 years old, and so for over 2 decades. And this is the first job I've ever had where I really felt safe and supported enough to be open about myself, and to start to learn how to self-advocate for my pronouns, and to talk about my partners, the people I've dated, sharing stories about ex-girlfriends, stuff like that. So on the professional end, community for me, community in the workplace with my colleagues is being able to create, as everybody's mentioned so far, that sense of support and a safe place to not be judged or dismissed, but also knowing to some degree that we all have common goals, and that we are all here to provide professional and social support for each other, so that, you know, our jobs aren't the most important thing to us. They're very important, but what's most important is that we are healthy and that we are safe. And so for me, in my little sphere, with my colleagues, that's what the community is for us. And that's what I try to offer and present to other people. To kind of touch on Amy's point about authenticity, it is, showing up with your true self. But for me, it's mostly about the culmination of a lot of humility and self-reflection. It's really easy to say, be true to yourself, show up, be who you are, but it's a lot harder to actually know what that is and to trust in yourself enough to know that that's who you are at your core and who you are as a member of your communities and who you are as a part of your culture and society at large.
Maya, thank you so much. And, you're sharing that this is the first workplace that you feel, safe in to be, to share your whole self. I mean, that's sobering. And I think it's a reminder that while we celebrate Pride and we're excited to do that, we also recognize that so many other people, including some of our friends and family, live in work in places, but also live in places where it's dangerous and feels dangerous to actually be authentic. So thank you for being so candid about that. I'm next excited to introduce Sarah Griffin. And Sarah, you come from the Surfrider Foundation, which is an incredible environmental advocacy organization for our coast. And you're one of the people that's working outside of state government. So a flavor of question I have for you, of course, is it's a broad question of, what your sense is of the importance of community and support in the workplace, but also within the environmental movement, your own observations around, how the movement and environmental organizations are moving towards, being open, affirming, safe, comfortable places for people of all identities to work. So welcome. And you've got an appropriate background given your coastal advocacy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Sarah Griffin. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Northern California Regional Manager for the Surfrider Foundation. I talk about this kind of stuff all day, every day. So it's really exciting to get to have an audience for it this time around. But it's really so exciting. I think this kind of work, working in natural resources, working within kind of the enviro space is really challenging. It's really serious. It's super pressing. There's constant devastation going on. And so as folks working in this space, I feel like you really need to find your joy and purpose for this work and something that keeps bringing you back to it so that it's sustainable for you. And for me, that really has been queer community. I think that there is so much transformative power in both queer joy and queer rage, that there is so much work to be done, that is really kind of what grounds me. So I'm a community organizer. Surfrider is a grassroots nonprofit, and I support chapters from, the San Mateo coast area all the way up to Humboldt. So super different areas working on very different things. But access to the beach is really kind of the focus of my work. And as a community organizer, I get to help build the work culture that I operate in. So it's this really kind of unique opportunity to, be bringing folks into, the coastal advocacy world, the kind of the sport of surfing, all of these different things. And this is a world that has been really exclusive. The history of environmentalism is very white. It's very rich. It's very ableist. And so I think that it's really important that constantly we are refocusing and centering environmental justice and communities that have been excluded from this work for a really long time. And so, as an organizer at heart, I love to push back against norms. So when I find myself in a space that's really like binary or white or patriarchal, I love to scheme and create change. And really, I think it's so powerful and it feels so good to be able to do. And I feel so lucky that, queer people have always existed. Queer people have always existed in the outdoors. And I've really been able to find a community of queer people specifically focused on, ocean advocacy and surfing. There's an organization called Queer Surf that I have been taking lessons with. I've always wanted to learn how to surf, but surfing's really intimidating. It's expensive. Surf shops are scary. Again, very, patriarchal, white dominated space. And so queer surf is, breaking down barriers and access to the ocean for folks, and it's for people of all bodies, all abilities. Another thing, thinking about intersectionality, surfing is for everyone, but if you walk into a surf shop, they're not size inclusive, and you would leave kind of with the sense that it really is not for everyone. And so, I am just so proud to be queer and so excited to be working in this space and to be, queering ocean advocacy and surfing
Amazing.
all together and doing it in community.
Wow. Well, thank you for all of that energy. That's incredible. And your ability, just the way you articulate that and the movement and the journey we have to be on in the environmental movement, that even today, a lot of these places are not necessarily welcoming, even within, what we view as a fairly progressive movement. So Sarah, thank you so much for that. I next want to introduce Agnes Vianson, who is actually making a repeat appearance as a secretary on the Secretary Speaker Series. I think you were on our Environmental Heroes series a couple years back. And Agnes, you lead this remarkable conservation corps in the Eastern Sierra. And among other things, I think have broke ground as creating the first conservation corps crew, queer crew and all women's crew. So just excited to check back in with you on this topic around, building community, supporting people to bring their authentic selves to the work and the conservation movement. So just interested in your observations on the discussion here today and what you want to lift up.
Yes, thank you, Secretary, for having me. I'm glad to have this opportunity again. Appreciate it, and in such amazing company today with all the other panelists. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Agnes. My pronouns are she, they, either is fine. And in 2016, I started the Eastern Sierra Conservation Corps. I'm the founder and ED. And in these 7 years, we've grown to be $1 million organization, something I wasn't expecting. It was certainly a leap of faith to see, even if it was one crew or one trip, what we could accomplish, but here we are. So I wear many of the hats as a facilitator, as a conflict resoluter and grocery getter, but we've got 4 crews on the ground this summer between the Trinity Alps and the Inyo National Forest. They're currently out there. And I think for me, I've been a lucky part of many communities. We each have our own families, chosen family. My parents are immigrants. I have a university family, I have a CCC family, NPS family community, and it hasn't always been the most supportive workplace. And that's part of today, and why some of us are here is because that needs to change, has needed to change, and is so important. And the work that all of us are doing is moving towards that change. But yeah, I would say that things that I could not imagine when I was a core member, having an all women's crew, having an all queer crew, having a place where we didn't have to code switch, where we didn't have to expend all of our emotional labor to educate, and have a place where, that you could just continue on and do all the things that were expected of you, and be who you are without having to explain, without having to have the judgment. And I think that's one of the things, like again, there's the California Conservation Corps is giant. There are corps all over California, all over the country, all doing amazing work. But I wanted to focus on some of the kind of leading with the inclusion part. A lot of us here have been doing this Jedi work since before it was called that. And to have something that was, the original CCC didn't even include certain folks. And so to have a place where we're going to build this from the ground up with the intention, with the planning and thoughts of who we want to serve and how we want to serve. And then also very intentionally in our leadership and development program, that it's meant to then go out into the world, whether it's the Conservation Corps world or the Forest Service or the Park Service, to bring that with them, to bring these best practices and lessons to other agencies. So that's quick and dirty.
Well, thank you for all that you have done and are doing. It's an incredible, incredible story. And more to come when we talk as a group. So our last panelist, but certainly not our least, is Stephanie Haskins. And Stephanie, you've served in state government and outside of state government in media, and really interested in your perspective, hearing this conversation as we celebrate Pride, maybe reflecting on your own journey, which as I've gotten to understand more, is just a really amazingly courageous journey. What are your thoughts on building the community we know we need to provide for our fellow employees and residents?
I think that look at us, look at you people here. It's amazing to me, because when I was last in state government 10 years ago, and as a really closeted queer person, even just 10 years ago, I did not feel safe to even consider coming out and being authentic and being true to myself. A couple stories that I will tell you. The last person I worked for at DMV was a terrible, terrible boss, awful man. And I was, frankly, one of the reasons that I retired early was to get away from him, because I felt so unsafe, not only as a closeted queer person, as somebody who was just beginning to understand my transgender situation, my sensibilities. When he found out that I had come out as a transgender woman 4 years ago, he started to make phone calls to all of my former colleagues to tell them and laugh about the fact that I had come out as a queer person. My suspicion is, I know now, looking at this group of people and the fact that we're having this discussion, that this guy would not be tolerated now. Because when I found out that he had done that, it was so hurtful. But my God, look at what we have done. Look at what you guys have accomplished by just having this meeting, putting this group together is for me, it's incredibly emotional. I worked in television news for 30 years. And as a closeted transgender person, as a queer person, all of my life, looking back on the last 10 years that I worked for KCRA, my boss was tasked to head up a syndication unit for KCRA, for John Kelly. And so I ran the department. And my number 2 guy was also gay, a gay man. And when I look back on those years, almost 40 years ago now, think about the history to that, is that a transgender woman, albeit very closeted, and a gay man were running one of the most successful television news operations in the country. We couldn't come out and talk about that. But the fact is that we ran it responsibly. We covered the hell out of this area. We broke some incredible stories. And yet our sensibility was that we were queer human beings who were afraid to announce to anybody else who we were. I don't think that would be a problem now. I don't think that would be an issue. I don't think that my last years, if I were still a DMV, I think I could proudly announce myself as a transgender woman. And I think probably the response would be, well, so what? What can you do for me now? How can you help us with our mission? Yeah, my gender, my sexuality, my queerness would not be an issue. So I think that, look at this. What a wonderful celebration this is. We have come so far. We have so many other issues to deal with, but still, I am so proud to be a part of this. It's very emotional for me, as you can tell. One last story as to where we are in terms of diversity and acceptance of each other, not just as queer people, but as males and females working together in an inclusive environment. Right after I was named executive producer at KCRA, again, almost 40 years ago, right after I started the job, my boss came to me and said, well, the management, the ownership, and his number 2 guy, they're really happy with what you're doing, but they have a concern. And I said, oh, what is that? And fair warning, I'm going to use the F-bomb here. He said, they're concerned that you don't use the word, you don't say fuck enough. And I thought, this is so emblematic, even at that time, of what male privilege does to our society and continues to do to it, and how exclusionary that patriarchism is to us as human beings, males and females, whatever our gender identity happens to be. And I thought, even then, what a disgusting way to judge my performance. How is that possible? 40 years later, I think that we have gone beyond that. But my sense is that when we talk about diversity and a happy workplace, a useful workplace, the first word, the only word that really comes to mind for me is kindness. We're kind to each other, even if we don't like each other, if we are kind to each other and understand that we all have different priorities and different sensibilities, and we can respect that within our group, our workplace group. I think that we have a real opportunity to create inclusive, happy work environments. And that's really what we're all about, is
That is so true.
trying to keep each other happy and included in each other's lives.
Wow. Stephanie, I could listen to your journey. I could spend a lot more time listening to your journey. And I note that Geeta put in the chat actually a documentary that it sounds like was just recently screened about this. And I find your courage inspiring, and I feel really proud that that you feel encouraged by our leaders on this and our workplace. I reflect on what Dr. King said, the arc of history bends towards justice. And I do think we've come a long way. At the same time, we're seeing attacks on queer people and transgender people across the country and frankly, within the state. So if we can bring it back to a group conversation, I think this has been an incredible conversation. We've got 150 people joining us on this. And if you get a sense of the emojis that are coming up, it seems like your collective comments have really resonated with everyone. We don't have too much time before the top of the hour when we end, but I wanted to ask you a question, which is, we obviously have folks joining today with all sorts of different identities, and some that may identify as allies that aren't necessarily from the queer community, but want to be strong allies, or other people that may just be coming to this conversation for the first time. What advice would you have for coworkers that might not be entirely comfortable understanding how they lead on creating a safe and comfortable workplace, an affirming workplace? Just any practical advice you have for people that are listening into that today that might be newer to this topic? And I'll call on somebody Amy, you saved me.
I would hop on and say first that for me, I think language plays a huge part in it. I spoke a little bit about how providing more gender inclusive language in law, but I think from the day-to-day, I personally use, instead of saying you guys, say y'all, or just even, I think a helpful practice is when you are talking with someone, whether you know them or not, or particularly if you don't know them, I encourage you to challenge yourself to, before you kind of tick a gender box for them, think about well, what to you signals, or why do you think this person would use those pronouns, or should you maybe want to ask them their pronouns, or introduce yourself with your pronouns first. I saw in the question of including pronouns in your email signatures, and I think that's great for everyone to do if you feel comfortable doing so, or if you use pronouns at all. I know some folks don't. That if you are cisgender, which means that you are affirmed by your gender assigned at birth, that that kind of signals to me as a queer person that, okay, they have some understanding of this, at least some baseline conversation can begin there. And going back to that, I think if you're not sure about someone's pronouns or any aspect of identity in that conversation, use they is generally accepted as the gender inclusive if you're not sure, and really encourage you to investigate all parts of your language, what words you might use that have man at the end. Can that be a more inclusive expanded to be person, etc. And I think I saw, Stephanie, you were unmuting too, so I'll pass on to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Stephanie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was I was listening to those wonderful words. It's interesting because I was attached to CCC back in 2005, and for a few months, and I found it to be an absolutely fabulous organization. But even in 2005, it was interesting that still, I think it was uncomfortable for queer people to be out. I kind of sensed that there were gay people even within the executive office, but nobody announced that. And transgender people, oh my God, what do we do with them? How do we house them? How would we accommodate those transgender people? So to me, again, I think that the sensibility is kindness, is that you may not like somebody and you may not even respect them as a human being, but why would you want to do damage to those people? Why would you want to hurt somebody by making them feel uncomfortable or demean them or make them feel less than who they are? So, to me, it's a very simple process that has become incredibly complicated over the years, because as we Americans tend to do, we will take little tiny problems and make them into giant problems. And oftentimes those problems become unsolvable problems or angry, unsolvable problems. So to me, I think workplace inclusivity, and it boils down to that one word, that one concept. Let's be kind to each other.
Absolutely. And one of our participants put in the Q&A, empathy, being another word, really, empathizing and working to understand, being compassionate about where folks are coming from and whatever dimension of their identity that they bring. Remarkable conversation. And I feel really lucky to live in a state and to, have leaders that embrace these values. I can look out of my window at the state capitol, and the state capitol was lit up in the rainbow colors earlier this month. Our seat of power in the 5th largest economy in the world. Yeah. It's incredible. I want to close out by just giving the opportunity for any of our incredible leaders here today, just to share something that you hope for the future, that you hope we have in the future, either more of what we have or something that we don't have right now. I'll pick on Maya because your mute is off.
That's on me for wanting to answer your previous question.
Oh, sorry.
No, I can incorporate both. I think one thing I'd really like to see in the future is for people who are new to being allies, whether it's, to the queer community, to the disabled community, people of color, economics, so on and so forth. I think what's really important is to do research on your own so that we aren't overloaded with a lot of very basic questions. It's flattering to have people come to me with basic questions, but it also gets very tiring of constantly being asked. For example, why do you use they, them? That's not a singular pronoun. Okay, well, look at Chaucer, so on and so forth. So I was an English major. I read a lot of Chaucer. So doing a lot of research before coming to people with questions, but also having the humility to listen, to truly listen, and to not preempt a response or form opinions off the cuff, I really want to see people who work really hard to be allies, to combat implicit biases, to look at microaggressions in the workplace that they may unintentionally perpetuate, and to work on having a defensive reaction to somebody in one of these marginalized communities not responding particularly pleasantly in some situations, and to trust that the people of these communities probably have a better understanding of what it's like to be in those communities.
Thank you for that. This conversation went really quickly. I think we could have allocated another hour to this. We are at the top of the hour. I want to let you all go. You've been remarkably generous with your time and just your honesty and your insights. So huge thanks to you all who came and shared your perspective and your story. Huge thanks to the over 150 people that joined us. As I mentioned, we have recorded this, and this will be available online that you can find on our resources.ca.gov website. If you have any, normally we bring up a slide that has an email address, any other questions.
Oops.
Looks like Wade may have dropped. Gita, do you want to take it over?
Thanks so much for joining, everyone. If you have any suggestions for upcoming Secretary Speaker Series, please email us at the email on the screen. Thank you so much for joining.